Today on CityCast Boise. Mormon reality TV is really having a moment, but something that hasn't gotten as much of a spotlight is what happens when people leave the LDS faith. Boise has a large and growing ex-Mormon population, so we're resharing our conversation on why the city is such a great place for people who have left the religion. It's Thursday, October 3rd. I'm Lindsay Van Allen, and this is what Boise's talking about. Today, Brittany Hargis, a comedian and comedy producer in Boise who's also ex-Mormon, is joining me to dive into this mysterious world of ex-Mormonism. Thank you for joining me, Brittany.
Thanks for having me, Lindsay.
I found that a lot of people are really fascinated by folks who leave their faith tradition, especially as adults. So what led you to leave the LDS Church or Mormonism?
Well, that's an interesting way to call us fascinating because usually we're just traumatized. But I think for me personally, I don't think I'm very unique in this. When people leave their religion, it's not usually one thing that did it for them. It's like a whole lot of stuff. It's just this pile of things that pushes them to starting to question. And for me, the invitation that I kind of gave myself to start questioning things, it came up in November of 2015. And Lindsay, you're ex-Mormon too. So do you remember the November 5th policy when that came out?
I sure do. I do. Can you explain that a little bit for everyone else who might not be familiar with the November policy?
Totally. The policy was, starting right then and there, any children of gay parents would not be allowed to get baptized along with all of their other, friends in church that get baptized at 8 years old. And instead, they were going to have to wait until they turned 18 years old, at which point they would need to stand in front of the elders of the church, call their parents apostates, and essentially denounce their parents, right? Just kind of shame their parents in order to then get approval to get baptized. And I think we can all unanimously agree that that doesn't feel good. That doesn't sound... At the time, I was born and raised Mormon. My dad was a bishop. I was that weird kid that read their Bible and the Book of Mormon at lunch at school. I was in the church. And hearing this policy, it just completely shook me because I, for the first time, realized, wait a minute, maybe God isn't that loving because this doesn't really feel good. And I couldn't shake it. Part of it was because I was pregnant and I had just found out I was pregnant, and I could not get over this feeling of why this felt so wrong and why it hurt me to my core. The idea of a child not being allowed to have the same privileges just because their parents were gay. And the sentence in my mind was it's not my kid's fault that I'm gay. And in my head, I'm uh-oh.
Did that bring up some new things for you, maybe that you hadn't thought about yet? Or
Oh yeah. So I started therapy. And it was a process where I was really proud of myself. I still am. That at the time I made the decision to not get a Mormon therapist, which is kind of a big deal.
Yeah.
And yeah, it is what started this entire process for me of going, okay, what if God isn't loving? Was the very first question I allowed myself to ask. What if this Mormon God that I've been raised to believe in isn't really the God I thought he was?
And did that cascade into more questions or deeper questions or?
Big time. It just I went full just existential crisis. But I went about it in a way that felt really good to me. I actually did the thing that Mormons are told to do when they have a question, is to go to God and pray and study. And that's what I did for, really a year. While I was pregnant and after my son was born, I spent an entire year. I reread the Book of Mormon multiple times. I read the Bible again. Going through church history and really getting into it, I realized that God didn't stop being a loving God on November 5th of 2015. There was this pattern of truly unloving behavior from this God I was taught to love in the Mormon religion.
And what changed for you after leaving Mormonism?
Well, literally everything. I think you first have to understand just how much Mormon culture permeates every facet of your life when you're an active member of the church. And so your friends, your social activities, your work, your jobs, your kids' friends, your activities that you do with your kids, like every single part of your day-to-day is influenced by the church. And so when you remove that foundational belief system, you have all of these other parts of your life impacted. And sometimes for the better, right? But at least at the start of it's painful. You know, I was kicked out of play groups for my son, and not in like a visceral way of like, get out of here. Like it's the beautiful thing about Mormons is that they are the best at being passive aggressive. So like no one's going to actually force you out of a situation, but you're going to feel it in your heart. And you also are very alone in the process and having to figure out, well, what is friendship now? And having to relearn what real friends are and relearn like what is actually happiness is a really scary thing, but also kind of a really exciting thing too. Like you lose a lot, but you also gain so much at the same time.
Absolutely. Yeah. When you really get broken down to those foundational levels, you find out a lot about yourself. It's incredibly hard.
Yeah.
But you find out a lot about yourself and you're able to relearn a lot of things and a lot of patterns of living.
Totally. And I think that's the part is while rebuilding feels daunting, it's also a lot of fun. Like I was 25 years old the first time I had alcohol. Like that's a hilarious thing to like say to someone that like, hi, I would like to try some alcohol, please. And
I was 28, so you beat me to it.
Yeah. It's one of those things. And what I have had like the pleasure of learning is when you share with people like, hey, I'm new at this, or like, will you show me, like, will you tell me why this works? Or like, what are your favorite rated R movies? Like people love to share and they love to be part of this like rebuilding process too. And I think that's really indicative of, I think what I had the pleasure of learning in Boise.
Yeah, I want to jump into that because I think people don't always know how important of a space Boise is for ex-Mormons. And it really, really, truly is. Idaho has the third highest LDS population of any state in the country. So, Brittany, were there any challenges with continuing to live in Idaho when you no longer identified with the LDS religion?
Oof, big time. I mean, first and foremost, like I have lived in Idaho for 15 years. I went to BYU, Idaho. Like I'm trying not to gag saying this. I feel like it's easier to tell people I am from Idaho. And it's like one of those things. It's a completely different experience on the east side of the state.
Yes.
So I spent a lot of time on the east side. I know you did too. Mm-hmm. And it's different. It's very bubble-like. I don't feel accepted. In fact, I've been booted out of a lot of these groups. I feel so alone. And also, I might possibly be gay, and I don't know what to do with this. So I need a whole new scene. I need to start over. I need a new place to rebuild. And at the time, Boise really felt like a good place to try that. And totally was. Like I had at least good instincts in that moment.
Yeah, it really is. I think what people would think an unusual choice, but really, really such a soft place to land, actually. So one little side note I wanted to make that I think a lot of people don't actually know that when you are exiting the LDS church, you don't just stop attending services on Sunday. It's not that simple.
Right.
You actually have to obtain legal documentation to truly leave. So Brittany, have you done the legal process to exit Mormonism?
I went through up until the notary part of it, and I still have the document getting set to be signed. So what I have done instead to like essentially remove myself from the church is I think I've successfully done all of the things that get you kicked out of it. So I think we're good. I think I'm out.
So in your heart, you've been kicked out. Just maybe a few more legal steps.
Adding another errand to my plate of seeing a notary feels like a very silly thing to do right now. But full respect to anyone that feels the need to do that. They want it off the numbers and the records of the church. If you feel like that's what you need to do, go for it. But for me personally, I got to a point of going through all of it and just kind of feeling like that is silly for me. That is a silly thing for me to do when I can spend a lot more time living my life and having a lot of fun doing it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So after leaving Mormonism or the LDS faith, you moved to Boise, and like we kind of alluded to, that might seem like an unusual choice considering that even though it's Boise, there's quite a large LDS influence in this area. So what was so appealing to you about coming to Boise?
I feel like Boise just felt like baby Portland, like it just felt like a starter pack to going to a big city. Like it felt like a little bit more like there's going to be more choices. There's going to be more things to do, but it's not so intimidating that like from a Mormon perspective that you're leaving, Zion and heading out into this like big and scary world. And Boise felt like a good in between. It felt familiar. I'd been here, visiting family and, temple trips and things like that. But yeah, I liked the idea that it was just far enough away, but not outside of my comfort zone.
Yeah, it's kind of like a baby step forward.
Totally.
Did moving to Boise help you process or move forward in your faith transition?
Absolutely. I mean, just the process of moving was such a cleansing process too. Like, and I don't mean to offend people saying this, but like when you're moving and you're packing things up and you're getting rid of things, it felt so freeing to, not just take these, paintings of temples that I'd been keeping in my garage, but get rid of them and like literally moving these like emotional weights that I'd put on the Mormon aspects of my life and starting fresh and building a home that was not built on religion that taught me to hate myself and others.
Were there any things that you found were difficult about being in Boise as an ex-Mormon?
Actually, no. I think the best part about being an ex-Mormon in Boise is that you are not special. Like there are so many ex-Mormons here. In doing comedy here too, like I can't think of one time I've ever done a show where there wasn't at least 2 ex-Mormons in the crowd. And I know I've done over 100 shows. And when I compare that to the shows I've done outside of Boise, outside of Idaho, like I can't tell jokes about Joseph Smith. I can't say things about Mormonism. Like that's a very unique thing to Boise. And not feeling like special is kind of a really huge relief. Mormons are taught that they're so special and unique. And when you're also like in the closet, you feel special and unique, but in kind of a horrible way. So feeling like you're not special here, there's a whole bunch of you all understand where you came from, you have that same foundation. It's kind of like a freeing feeling.
I know that might seem like a conundrum to people, but I felt that same relief when you realize you're not maybe on this pedestal or an example. You're just like everyone else. That's it's a very freeing feeling, and definitely helped me feel more like a camaraderie just with all people in general. Like, oh, we're all just trying to navigate this together. So Brittany, I want to know, based on your experience living in Eastern Idaho and then moving to Boise, why is Boise such a great place to be in during a faith transition or after a faith transition?
Well, that's a really good question. I think what Boise does a really good job of is feeling familiar, just being familiar enough, right? So you're still going to see, like, you still have like this kind of like quiet downtown, but there's bars you can go to, right? You can, I mean, you can see pride flags. Like, though, that's not really something you see in a lot of other towns in Idaho. I think what Boise does a really good job of is showing inclusivity and showing just like probably like the most diversity that you can see in Idaho is in Boise. Like, that's something that feels really safe and secure.
Absolutely. I definitely, I always joke, and I don't know if people who haven't experienced it completely understand, but I always joke that after my faith transition, I had to learn how to be an adult.
Yeah.
And I think part of what was so nice in Boise about that is how friendly people are and how kind they are when you say, I don't know how to order a drink, or I don't know how to order coffee, or I've never been to a bar or a club.
Right.
I'm not quite sure what to do. People are really kind about that overall, I found. That was really comforting because it is embarrassing as a 28-year-old to be like, I have no idea what to order at a coffee shop. I don't know what any of this even means. And I think in a lot of other spaces or other cities, that would feel really intimidating. And people in Boise were really kind about it.
Well, and I think too, like, where it's not a smaller city, like Idaho Falls, which is where I was, if I wanted to go to a bar, the chances of me going there and not recognizing someone, like, that would be kind of hard because it's still smaller. And so when you're going through a faith transition of any kind and you're in a smaller city, like, there's direct impacts that can happen when people do see you actively transitioning out of a faith, right? Like, there are consequences. So going to somewhere like Boise that's a little bit bigger, you still have the friendliness aspect of it, but you remove a lot of the judgment that's involved in a smaller town.
Absolutely. Brittany, you started doing stand-up comedy after you came to Boise, right?
Yes. I started actually in 2020. It was not in Boise. I like tried an open mic during the pandemic. It was an outdoor thing in Portland, masked. It was hilarious. Not a good experience, but I fell in love with the idea of it. It was something that during my faith crisis, I'd been writing about it. I'd been writing jokes. I'd been chasing after this dream that I thought I'll never be able to do stand-up comedy because as a Mormon, you can't swear. You can't think inappropriate thoughts. You can't offend people. You can't say anything, that feels divisive. And so part of my way of leaving the church was also embracing that, like, anything I wanted to do with the rest of my life was my choice now. And stand-up comedy was something that I wanted to give it an honest shot.
And a lot of your jokes, I've seen your shows, a few of them, and a lot of your jokes deal with ex-Mormonism and coming out and having all of this transition so quickly. Do you feel like that plays well for Boise audiences?
Oh, big time. And just a quick shout out to Crystal Moore, who produces the Jack Mormon Comedy Hour show. She does this around General Conference every year, so April and October. And I told one of the very first jokes that I ever wrote at all, and it was, I'm not Mormon anymore. I'm what you would call a prostate. And that was one of those things that, like, being an apostate to a church and making light of something that felt so heavy to so many people, and realizing, again, you're not alone. There's so many people here who would be considered heathens in the eyes of religion. But in reality, it's just a bunch of people getting together to laugh at our trauma and our pain and bond over it. Like, that's a really beautiful thing. This is absolutely a good community for laughing through the pain.
Absolutely. And that's something that I found, and I think a lot of people find is very cathartic, being able to laugh about ourselves, laugh about this really hard and traumatic experience, and, let it be funny for a little bit. It doesn't always have to be serious. It doesn't always have to be something that was so hard. It can be funny sometimes.
Right. And being able to laugh at yourself and laugh at where you came from and being able to do that, it actually takes away the power and the control that you used to give it in your life. Right. And so it's actually a really healing thing to be able to say, I'm not going to choose to let this be a control. I'm going to choose to let this entertain me now.
Mormonism can be seen as fascinating and mysterious and even kind of unusual to people not of the LDS faith. So what do you think that non-Mormons get wrong about the church, but also what do they get right?
Ooh, okay. Well, I feel like the thing that I got asked the most as a Mormon, because I had plenty of like non-Mormon friends and coworkers, but like the question that you get all the time is, do you really wear magic underwear? Right? Like, I feel like that's the question that comes up a lot. And I mean, I'll be the first to tell you, it's not magic. It's just a cotton poly blend. It's not special. And no magic powers. I tried really hard for it to do something and it never did. I think a lot of times that Mormons are, for the most part, accurately described as being not very accepting. The belief of saying like, hate the sin, love the sinner, you're still using the word hate. We're still teaching hate regardless. And I think it's fairly safe to say that not being accepted is a pretty big tenet of that people get correct.
Yeah. There's a list of things that LDS people are not supposed to do if they are strictly adhering to their faith.
Yes.
And I found that every ex-Mormon has something or several somethings that were previously forbidden that become their favorite things. So, for example, one of mine is drinking coffee. I started drinking coffee 9 years ago, and every single day it still feels incredibly special and like I'm getting away with something. So, Brittany, what is one of your favorite previously forbidden activities?
Okay, this is very simple, but literally Sundays, just Sundays being nothing is a treat to me. I used to dread Sundays because that was when you're getting up so early for your various callings in the church. You're going to church for, well, at the time for us, it was like 3 hours long, and then your meetings and stuff afterwards. And I love Sundays now. Same as you, like sitting out on my patio, just drink a cup of coffee and just appreciate what's around me. That's not something I used to do as a Mormon.
So if you could see yourself now, like 10 years ago, 9 years ago, what do you think you would think about what you're doing and where you are in your life?
Well, Mormon me would have judged the absolute shit out of where I'm at right now. But if I could have shown myself how happy I would be and what was possible, I mean, 10 years ago, if you would have told me, hey, like, it's not Satan, it's that you're attracted to women, and also love is beautiful, and producing comedy shows in Boise, it's going to make it so you can actually like help people process pain and feel a sense of connection. And there are so many parts of my life right now that I wouldn't have ever guessed it or picked it for myself. But oh my gosh, I wish I would have had a head start at how happy I could have been so long ago.
That's all for today here on CityCast Boise. If you enjoyed the show, you should subscribe to our Hey Boise newsletter. We'll be back tomorrow morning with our Friday news roundup. You won't want to miss it.